Under the wide Texas sky, where the wind carried both dust and memory, the river moved slowly that evening, whispering stories to the land that had long since learned to listen. The sun had dropped behind the ridge, leaving behind a bruised orange glow that softened the hard edges of the canyon. Coyotes would start howling soon, and the first chill of night was already settling over the plains. That's when he saw her. Eli Turner had been riding since dawn, chasing stray cattle that had wandered off from the herd. He wasn't one for talking, not to folks and not even much to his horse, but something about that quiet stretch by the river always made him think, about the things he'd lost, the things he'd never said, and the things he still carried deep where words couldn't reach. He reined his horse slowly when he spotted a figure by the riverbank, small, still, half hidden behind a fallen tree. At first, he thought it was a coyote or a drifter's shadow, but as he rode closer, he saw her, a young woman in a torn blue dress, kneeling in the mud, her hands trembling over the water. Her face was turned away, but he could see the kind of stillness that comes from more than cold. It was the stillness of someone who's run out of places to go. Eli dismounted, boots crunching against the gravel. He didn't say a word right away. In the West, words were like bullets, best used only when you needed them. The river sighed between them, slow and mournful. The girl flinched when she heard his steps, like a deer that's been hunted too long. Her shoulders shook, and he saw the glint of tears fall into the current. He stopped a few feet away, hands loose at his sides, voice low and steady, the kind of voice meant to calm a spooked horse. "Miss," he said, "you lost out here." She didn't answer. Just stared at the water like it held something she couldn't bear to see reflected. Eli took off his hat, ran a hand through his wind-tangled hair, and crouched near the bank. "Ain't no shame in bein' lost," he said after a long pause. "This land's got a way of swallowin' folks whole if they ain't careful." The girl finally turned her head. Her eyes were red-rimmed but fierce, the kind of look that told him she'd been fighting the world too long to ask for help now. "Go away," she whispered. "Please." He studied her a moment, the torn hem of her dress, the faint bruise along her wrist, the mud caked on her shoes like she'd been walking miles. There was fear in her voice, but also pride, and Eli respected that. Still, he couldn't just leave her there in the cold. He stood up slowly, pulling his duster tighter against the wind. "River gets colder after sunset," he said, eyes on the horizon. "Coyotes come down from the ridge, too. If you plan on staying, you'll need a fire." She didn't answer, but he saw her shoulders slump a little, not in defeat, but exhaustion, the kind that comes from running too long from something you can't outrun. He walked back to his horse, untied a wool blanket, and tossed it her way. She didn't take it at first, just stared like it might be a trick. But then, when the wind kicked up and the chill bit harder, she reached out, wrapped it around herself, and whispered a quiet, "Thank you." Eli nodded once, mounted back up, and looked toward his ranch, the lights faint in the distance. "Ain't safe by the river tonight," he said, voice calm but sure. "You can ride back with me. Ain't far. Got food. Warmth. No one'll bother you there." The girl hesitated, eyes darting toward the darkening trees. "Why would you help me?" she asked, her voice trembling between suspicion and hope. He met her gaze, steady, unwavering. "'Cause everyone deserves a chance to stop running," he said. "You ain't alone now, miss." For a moment, she just looked at him, a stranger in the dying light, dust on his boots and sincerity in his voice. Then she nodded, slow and uncertain, like someone stepping out onto thin ice. Eli reached down a hand. She stared at it for a long second before finally taking it, and when her fingers touched his, he could feel the weight of whatever she'd been carrying. He helped her onto his horse, careful and quiet. As they started back toward the ranch, the stars began to come out one by one, scattered across the velvet sky. The river faded behind them, its whispers replaced by the steady rhythm of hooves on dry ground. Neither spoke for a while. She held the blanket tight, and he kept his eyes on the horizon. But something had shifted in that silence, two souls who'd been wanderin', their own separate storms now ridin', the same trail, if only for a little while. And as the moon climbed higher, Eli couldn't help but think, maybe the West wasn't done teachin' him about second chances. The wind was colder by the time Eli Turner and the girl reached the edge of his land. The river's hum was long behind them, replaced by the soft creak of saddle leather and the faint howl of coyotes somewhere in the distance. His horse, Duke, moved steadily through the dark, like he knew the way home even without the moon to guide him. The girl leaned forward slightly, holding tight to the blanket, her head bowed as if she was afraid the world might see her if she looked up. Eli didn't press her for words. He'd learned a long time ago that silence could speak plenty if you let it. The way she clung to the blanket, the tremor in her breath, he didn't need to ask what kind of trouble she'd come from. Trouble had a way of leaving marks deeper than any bruise. When the outline of the ranch finally appeared, a small cabin tucked against the cottonwoods, he felt something stir in his chest he hadn't felt in years. Not joy, exactly. More like a quiet purpose. It had been a long time since anyone had needed him for anything other than a strong back and a steady hand. He helped her down when they reached the porch. She stood there, staring at the cabin's warm glow through the window, hesitant, like someone who'd forgotten what safety even looked like. "It ain't much," Eli said, tying off Duke's reins, "but it's warm, and it's mine. You'll be safe here." She gave a small nod. Her hands were shaking when she tried to open the door, so he reached past her and did it himself, stepping aside so she could enter first. Inside, the air smelled faintly of wood smoke and coffee. The fire he'd left smoldering that morning had nearly gone out, so he crouched down and fed it fresh kindling. Flames caught quickly, dancing orange against the walls, and light spilled across the small room, showing the worn table, a rifle by the door, and a few books stacked near the bed. The girl hovered near the fire, rubbing her hands together. She looked younger in the light, maybe 20, maybe less, but her eyes had seen years more than her face could carry. He poured water from the kettle, handed her a tin cup. She took it like it was gold, sipped slowly, and said, barely above a whisper, "Thank you, Mr. Turner," he said. "Eli Turner." She hesitated, then said softly, "Clara." Eli nodded once. "You runnin' from somethin', Clara?" Her eyes flicked up, sharp and frightened. For a moment, he thought she might bolt right back into the cold. But then she just stared at the flames, shoulders drawn tight. "From someone," she said finally. "A man." Eli's jaw clenched, but he didn't speak. He'd known men like that, cruel with their hands and worse with their hearts. The kind that made good women disappear from towns overnight, whispering names nobody dared repeat. Clara's voice shook when she went on. "He ain't gonna stop lookin'. I thought maybe I could make it across the state line, find work, maybe hide a while. But the storm came and," her voice cracked. "I didn't know where else to go." Eli stirred the fire, his mind turning slow like the gears of an old windmill. He wasn't one for savant souls, but he couldn't turn away someone already broken by another man's cruelty. "You ain't gotta explain more," he said, his tone calm but firm. "Ain't no one comin' here without crossin' me first." Clara looked at him then, eyes wide with a mix of disbelief and gratitude. "Why re you helpin' me, Mr. Turner? You don't even know me." He leaned back, staring into the flames. "Ain't about knowin'," he said. "It's about doin' right by folks who got a bad deal. My pa used to say, when the Lord sends someone your way, it ain't by accident." The room went quiet except for the pop of the fire. Clara's hands stilled, and for the first time since he'd found her, she breathed deep, like maybe she believed him. Eli stood and hung his hat on the peg near the door. "There's stew left from supper," he said. "Ain't fancy, but it'll fill you up. Bed's yours tonight. I'll take the chair." She opened her mouth to argue, but stopped when she saw the look in his eyes. Not pride, not pity, just the kind of quiet resolve that didn't leave room for debate. While she ate, Eli stepped out to the porch, lighting a lantern and setting it near the steps. The stars were brighter now, cold and clear, stretching endlessly above the plains. He scanned the ridge out of habit, eyes sharp. Out here, you learn to trust the dark as much as the light. He stayed out a while, letting the night settle around him. The wind carried the scent of sagebrush, the whisper of coyotes. He thought about Clara, about what kind of man would chase a woman so far she'd rather die in the river than be found. When he finally came back inside, she was asleep by the fire, blanket pulled tight around her shoulders. Her breathing was steady, peaceful, and even. Eli sat in a chair nearby, arms crossed, and watched the flames dance. It had been a long time since his cabin felt like more than just four walls. Tonight, with the sound of her breathing filling the silence, it almost felt like home again. But deep down, Eli knew peace like this didn't come free. Out here in the west, every calm night was just a quiet before the next storm. Morning came slow and gray, dragging its light across the valley like a tired horse. The air was heavy with the smell of rain that hadn't fallen yet, and the clouds hung low over the hills, the kind that promised a storm before nightfall. Eli Turner stepped out of his cabin and breathed deep, his eyes sweeping the land the way they always did. The ranch was still, the only sounds the rustle of cottonwoods and the soft clatter of the windmill turning in the breeze. The world felt calm, but Eli's gut told him that calm was about to break. Inside, Clara stirred awake. She looked different in daylight, softer somehow, like the shadows of last night had faded just a little. Her hair, tangled and streaked with dust, caught the firelight, and for a moment Eli forgot how to look away. But when her eyes opened, he saw the fear hadn't left them. It had just gone quiet, buried deeper. "You sleep all right?" he asked, pouring coffee into a tin mug. She nodded, clutching the blanket like she didn't quite believe she'd earned the right to rest. "I did. Better than I have in weeks." Eli set the mug on the table beside her. "Got chores to tend to. You can stay here, rest up. Firewood's out back if you need it. I'll be back before noon." She hesitated, then said softly, "Thank you, for last night, for all this." He gave a small nod. "Ain't no need for thanks. Just try not to disappear on me, all right?" A faint smile flickered on her lips, the first one he'd seen. "I won't." Eli stepped outside, closing the door gently behind him. He saddled Duke and rode toward the pasture, the morning sun fighting to break through the thickening clouds. But even as he worked, checking fences and counting cattle, his mind kept drifting back to the girl by the fire. There was something about her that pulled at him, not just pity, but something else, something quieter. By midday, the wind had picked up, and the smell of rain was stronger. He turned Duke back toward the cabin just as thunder rolled across the plains. As he approached, he saw movement near the front gate, a dust trail in the distance, faint but steady. He narrowed his eyes. A rider. Whoever it was, they weren't moving like a ranch hand. The figure rode hard, cutting straight across the ridge instead of following the trail. Eli felt the first knot of unease twist in his chest. He pushed Duke faster, dismounted by the porch, and went inside. Clara was by the window, her face pale. She'd seen it too. "A man is ridin' this way," she said, her voice trembling. "I know that horse. I know the way he rides." Eli didn't ask how she knew, he could see it written all over her face. He crossed to the cabinet near the door, pulled down his rifle, and checked the chamber. "You stay inside. Don't open that door unless it's me." She reached out, grabbing his arm. "Please, don't, he's dangerous. You don't know what he's capable of." Eli met her eyes. "I don't need to know. You're under my roof now. That makes you my responsibility." She wanted to argue, but his voice left no room for it. He stepped out into the wind just as the first drops of rain began to fall. The rider was close now, dark coat, wide hat, the kind of man who carried trouble like a shadow. He pulled up about 20 yards from the porch, his horse snorting steam into the chill air. Eli stood firm, rifle resting easily in his hands. "Can I help you, stranger?" he called out. The man tipped his hat back, revealing a scar that ran from his temple to his jaw. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Name's Wade Callan. I'm looking for someone. A girl. About yay tall, brown hair, blue dress. Might have passed this way." Eli's jaw tightened. "Ain't seen anyone fit that description." Wade's eyes narrowed. "Funny thing, Turner. Folks down in Cedar Ridge said you rode out that way yesterday. Said you were seen headin' back with someone." Eli said nothing. The silence stretched between them like a drawn gun. Wade leaned forward in his saddle, his voice lowering. "She's my wife. She ran off. Took something that don't belong to her." Eli felt a flicker of anger rise in his chest. The man's tone wasn't grief, it was ownership, pure and cold. "Far as I see it," Eli said evenly, "if she ran, maybe she had a reason." Wade's smile vanished. "You hand her over, and I'll forget I saw you. Otherwise," his hand drifted toward his holster. Eli's grip tightened on the rifle. "Ain't gonna happen." For a long moment, neither man moved. The rain came harder now, drumming against the porch roof, soaking the dust until it turned to mud. Then Wade sneered, spat into the dirt, and pulled his reins. "You made yourself an enemy, Turner. I'll be back for her, and you can count on that." He turned and rode off, his silhouette fading into the storm. Eli stood there, watching until the horizon swallowed him whole. Then he lowered his rifle and exhaled slowly, steadily. Inside, Clara was trembling by the window. "He's not gonna stop," she whispered. "He never does." Eli turned to her, rain dripping from the brim of his hat. "Then he'll have to ride through me first." The thunder rolled again, closer this time, like the sky itself was warning what was coming. The West had seen its share of storms, but this one felt personal. And deep down, Eli knew the moment Wade Callan rode away, that peace he'd felt for one single night had just turned into a battle he couldn't walk away from. The storm rolled in hard that night, beating against the cabin like the sky itself had a score to settle. Wind howled through the cottonwoods, rain striking the windows in relentless bursts. The whole world outside was a blur of gray and thunder, but inside, the fire still burned, casting long shadows across the walls. Eli Turner stood by the hearth, wiping down his rifle with slow, careful strokes. His jaw was tight, his shoulders set like a man ready for a fight he hadn't asked for but couldn't turn away from. Across the room, Clara sat wrapped in the blanket again, watching him quietly. Her eyes followed every motion, every flick of light that caught on the metal barrel. "You think he'll come tonight?" she asked finally, her voice small beneath the roar of the wind. Eli didn't look up right away. "If he's smart, he'll wait for the rain to ease," he said. "But men like that don't always wait when anger's driving 'em. Either way, we'll be ready." She nodded, but her hands twisted in her lap. "He won't stop till he gets what he wants." Eli finally turned, resting the rifle against the table. "What's he want, Clara?" Her eyes dropped to the fire. "Control. Always control." She swallowed hard. "He said I belonged to him, that no matter where I went, I'd always be his. I tried to leave before, twice. The first time, he found me. Second time, her voice broke. He made sure I'd never try again." Eli's chest tightened. He'd known the type. Men who mistook cruelty for strength, who broke what they couldn't possess. His hands curled unconsciously into fists. "You did right runnin'," he said, his tone quiet but sure. "And you ain't gotta run anymore." She looked up then, eyes shining in the firelight. "Why do you care, Eli? You don't even know me." He paused, his gaze meeting hers across the flicker of flame. Because I know what it's like to lose something that meant the world to you, he said. And I ain't gonna stand by and watch another innocent pay for someone else's sins. The fire cracked between them. For a long while, neither spoke. The storm outside raged on, thunder shaking the walls, but inside, the silence was almost peaceful. Clara rose from the chair and walked to the window, staring out into the blackness. You think the rain can wash away a past? She whispered. Eli stepped beside her, watching the lightning flash across the plains. Maybe not, he said softly. But it sure can give you a clean start. She looked at him then, really looked. In his eyes, she saw the same loneliness she'd been running from, an ache not born from cruelty but from loss. There was a steadiness in him, something solid to hold on to when the world turned mean. For the first time since she'd left her old life behind, Clara felt safe enough to breathe. Eli noticed it too, the way her shoulders eased, the faint light returning to her face. He wasn't sure what it meant yet, but it stirred something deep inside him, something he hadn't felt in years. Hope, maybe. Or the start of it. He stoked the fire once more, then sat back, the chair creaking beneath his weight. You get some rest, he said. We'll need clear heads come morning. Clara nodded, but sleep didn't come easily that night. She lay awake listening to the rain, the low hum of the wind, and the steady rhythm of Eli's boots pacing across the floor. Every few minutes, she'd glance toward the window, half expecting to see that dark silhouette out there in the lightning's flash. But each time, she saw only Eli, quiet, watchful, patient. Hours passed. The storm began to ease, the thunder rolling off toward the hills. Somewhere deep in the night, Clara finally drifted into a fitful sleep. Eli stayed up long after, his rifle leaning against the wall, his thoughts heavy. He'd seen enough of the world to know that trouble rarely traveled alone. Wade Callan wasn't just a man with a grudge, he was a man with power, the kind who could twist fear into a weapon. But Eli wasn't afraid of men like that. Not anymore. He stepped onto the porch just before dawn, the rain gone, leaving behind a hush that felt almost sacred. The ground shimmered with puddles, the air smelling of wet earth and wild sage. The storm had cleaned everything, except the weight in his chest. He looked out toward the ridge. The trail was slick, the mud deep, but he could see faint hoofprints still fresh from the night before. Wade hadn't gone far. He'd circled, maybe camped out just beyond sight, waiting for daylight to make his move. Eli exhaled, slow and deliberate. The sun was just beginning to rise, turning the clouds to gold. Behind him, he heard the cabin door creak open. Clara stepped out, the blanket draped over her shoulders. Her hair was loose, wild in the morning light. He's still out there, isn't he? She asked. Eli nodded once. Most likely. But he's gonna find out the hard way, this land doesn't take kindly to men who come with bad intent. Clara stared at him for a long moment, then said softly, You could still turn me in. Pretend you never saw me. Save yourself a fight that ain't yours. He looked at her, his expression unreadable for a beat. Then he said, steady as ever, Some fights are worth having. She blinked, the words catching something deep inside her. Eli stepped down into the yard, scanning the horizon once more. The storm might have passed, but the real one, the one between him and the man comin' for her, was just gettin' started. And out here, under that vast, untamed sky, Eli Turner knew he'd ride through hell itself before he let anyone drag her back into the dark she'd escaped. By the time the sun climbed high enough to touch the tops of the pines, Eli knew trouble wasn't far off. The air carried it, that heavy stillness before something breaks. He'd felt it before, out on the trail, right before ambush or heartbreak. It was the kind of quiet that made your hands itch for your gun and your heart whisper prayers you didn't even believe in anymore. Clara helped him hitch the horses out back, her movements slow, cautious. She'd barely said a word since dawn, but her eyes told enough. Fear was a hard thing to hide, and she wore it like a shadow. You don't have to stay out here, Eli said, checking the saddle straps. If things turn rough, you take the back path through the cottonwoods. It'll lead you to the creek. Keep low, move quietly. Clara shook her head. I ain't running again. Eli turned to her, brow furrowing. You think standin' your ground means dyin' for it? She met his gaze, her chin lifting. I think runnin' only teaches men like him that they can always catch up. Maybe it's time he learned differently. Eli almost smiled, just barely. There was steel in her voice now, the kind forged by pain and tempered by courage. He nodded once. Then we'll face it together. The morning dragged slowly, each minute stretching longer than the last. Around noon, a rider appeared on the ridge, just one at first, a black speck moving against the horizon. Then another. Then 3 more. By the time they came into full view, Eli counted 5 men in total. Wade Callan rode at the center, his coat dark and heavy, his hat pulled low. Even from a distance, Eli could see the smug tilt of his shoulders. They found us, Clara said quietly. Eli's jaw clenched. No. We found them. He led her inside, handing her a small revolver from the drawer. You ever shot one before? She hesitated, then nodded once. My pa taught me before he passed. Good, Eli said. Then keep your aim steady and your heart steadier. He stepped back out, the sun glinting off the rifle slung across his shoulder. The men had stopped about 50 yards from the cabin, horses restless beneath them. Wade dismounted first, boots sinking into the soft earth. Well now, Wade called out, voice dripping with mock politeness. Ain't this a fine mornin' to catch up with old friends? Eli stood his ground at the edge of the porch. Ain't no friends here, Callan. Turn your horse around and ride back the way you came. Wade grinned, a slow, cruel grin. You always had a way of makin' enemies, Turner. Heard you got yourself mixed up with my property. Eli's fingers twitched near his belt. She ain't your property. She's a free woman. Wade chuckled darkly. She's mine by vow and by law. You think a few kind words and a roof make her yours? You don't know the half of it. Clara stepped out then, revolver in hand. Her voice shook, but she spoke clearly. You don't own me, Wade. You never did. Wade's grin faltered, surprise flickering in his eyes. Careful, darlin'. You know how I handle disrespect. Eli moved down a step, his shadow cutting across the porch. You take one more step toward her, and I'll show you how I handle men who raise their hand to a woman. The tension snapped like a drawn wire. For a heartbeat, no one breathed. Then one of Wade's men shifted in his saddle, and the world erupted. A gunshot cracked the still air, echoing through the valley. Then another. Birds scattered from the trees. The horses reared, snorting and screaming. Eli fired once, dropping a man clean from his saddle. The rest dove for cover behind the fence posts. Bullets splintered the porch rail, and glass shattered from the cabin window. Clara crouched inside, steadying her hand just like her pa had taught her, and squeezed the trigger. The shot went wide, but it was close enough to make one of Wade's men flinch and fall back. Eli moved like a man possessed, calm but deadly. Years of hard living and harder lessons had trained him for moments like this. He fired, ducked, rolled, reloaded, each motion smooth as river stone. Then silence fell again, sudden and strange. Smoke hung thick in the air, the smell of gunpowder sharp and bitter. 3 of Wade's men were down. 1 horse had bolted. Wade himself stood behind a fallen beam, gun drawn but hesitating. Eli stepped forward, rifle steady. End this now, Callan. Wade's eyes burned with hate. You think you're some kind of hero? You don't even know her. She'll ruin you like she ruined me. Eli's jaw tightened. She didn't ruin you. You did that all on your own. For a second, Wade's finger tightened on the trigger, then Clara's voice cut through the silence, trembling but sure. You can't hurt me anymore, Wade. You already took everything I was. But I won't let you take who I am. Her words hung in the air like a bell ringing through the church air. Wade looked at her, his fury flickering into something hollow. Then he backed away slowly, spitting into the dirt. This ain't over, Turner. You can't hide her forever. He whistled for his horse and swung up in one smooth motion, the remaining man following him down the trail. Eli kept his gun raised until they vanished beyond the ridge. Then he exhaled, shoulders finally loosening. Clara stepped out, lowering the revolver, her hands shaking. Is it over? Eli looked at her, his voice soft but certain. Not yet. But it's startin' to be. The wind picked up again, carrying the scent of rain and dust. He turned to her, and for the first time since she'd come into his life, he smiled, a small, tired smile that said everything words couldn't. And she knew, right then, she wasn't alone anymore. Evening came slow that day, like the sky itself was tired of fightin'. The sun sank low over the plains, bleeding red across the clouds, and the wind carried a hush that only comes after troubles had its say. The land was still, save for the soft creak of Eli's porch and the faint rustle of grass bending under the weight of dusk. Eli sat on a chair by the fire inside, shirt torn, shoulder grazed by a bullet. He'd patched worse wounds in his time, but the pain was dull and mean, reminded him he was still alive, still human. Clara knelt beside him, steady hands dabbing at the cut with warm water and torn cloth. Her touch was gentle, almost reverent. You should have let me help sooner, she said softly. You're losin' too much blood. Eli gave a faint smirk. Wouldn't be the first time. Won't be the last. She frowned. You joke too easily for a man shot. He met her eyes. If I didn't, I'd spend all my days drownin' in what's gone wrong. Her hand paused, cloth pressed against his shoulder. What's gone wrong? She asked quietly. He didn't answer right away. The fire popped, sending a spark up the chimney. Finally, he said, my brother. He used to run this ranch with me. We had dreams, big ones. Then the war came, and he never made it back. Guess I stayed here hopin' the land might bring him home somehow. Clara's eyes softened. I'm sorry. Eli shook his head slowly. Don't be. Just the way of things out here. You lose enough, you learn not to beg fate for mercy. She dipped the cloth again, wiping away the last trace of blood. Still, you didn't have to help me. You could have turned me away. He looked at her, really looked. The firelight danced across her face, painting her eyes with gold. I reckon I could have, he said. But then I'd still be sittin' here alone listenin' to the wind and wonderin' if I'd done right by anyone in this world. Maybe this was my chance to set something straight. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence wasn't empty, it was heavy with things they both felt but didn't know how to name. Clara turned back to the wound, her voice quieter now. When I left him, I thought I'd die before I got this far. I didn't know where I was headed, only that I couldn't stay. Each mile felt like a borrowed breath. Eli listened, his gaze steady on the flames. I used to dream about freedom, she continued. But when I finally had it, it didn't feel real. Just lonely. Like the sky was too big and the world too wide. Then I saw you on that ridge, and for the first time, I didn't feel scared to stop running. Eli's chest tightened. He didn't know what to say, so he didn't. Sometimes, silence said it better. Clara finished wrapping the bandage, her fingers brushing his skin just once before she pulled away. The touch lingered longer than it should have. You'll live, she murmured, smiling faintly. You're too stubborn not to. He huffed a quiet laugh. That's one way to put it. The firelight flickered over them, soft and low. Outside, the night gathered in, stars beginning to blink awake one by one. A coyote called somewhere far off, its cry echoing through the valley like a memory. Clara rose and went to the window. The moon was climbing over the ridge, pale and watchful. "Do you think he'll come back?" she asked. Eli leaned back in the chair, eyes half closed. "Men like Wade don't quit easily. But fear's a strange thing. It makes a man think twice after losing the first fight." She nodded slowly. "And if he doesn't? Then we figure out what comes next," Eli said. "You'll need a place to stay, work to keep you busy. I could use another hand on the ranch, truth be told." Clara turned to him, surprise flickering across her face. "You'd keep me here? After all this trouble?" Eli met her gaze. "Trouble's nothing new to me. But good company, that's rarer than rain in August." For the first time, she smiled, a real one, soft and warm like dawn breaking through the fog. "I'll earn my keep," she said. He nodded. Never doubted it. They sat in the quiet a long while, both staring into the fire like it held answers neither of them could voice. Somewhere in that silence, something shifted between them, something fragile but certain. When Clara finally rose to head to her room, she paused in the doorway. "Thank you," she whispered. Eli didn't look up, but his voice was gentle when he replied. "Get some rest, Clara. Tomorrow's another long day." She lingered for a second more, watching him, then slipped away down the narrow hall. Eli stared into the flames until his eyes burned. The ache in his shoulder was nothing compared to the ache that had been building in his chest since the moment he'd found her by that river. He didn't know what name to give it, hope, maybe, or danger, but he knew it was something he couldn't turn his back on. Outside, the wind picked up again, soft and mournful. Somewhere beyond the hills, the world was still turning, full of trouble and beauty and second chances. And in that little cabin beneath the wide Texas sky, two souls who'd been broken by the world were slowly, quietly learning how to be whole again. The days that followed were steady ones. The kind that comes after trouble, when the air feels lighter but the land still remembers what it's been through. The storms passed, the sky cleared, and the ranch woke to a rhythm it hadn't known in years. Eli was up before dawn, same as always. But now, when he stepped out onto the porch with his coffee in hand, there was another light in the window, Clara's. She'd taken to the work like she'd been born for it. Feeding the chickens, mending the fence lines, even learning to saddle the old mare that hadn't seen much use since Eli's brother died. It was quiet work, but something was healing in it. Every hammer's ring, every bucket of water drawn from the well, it all built a kind of peace neither of them had felt in a long while. Eli watched her sometimes from a distance, the way her hair caught the sun, the way she talked to the horses like they were old friends. There was a steadiness in her that hadn't been there before, a fire that burned cleaner now that she wasn't running scared. One morning, she caught him looking and smiled. "You ever take a break, Eli Turner?" He took a slow sip of his coffee. "Ain't much reason to. Work's gotta get done." She set down the feed bucket, tilting her head. "Seems to me even a man like you could use a breath now and then." He smiled faintly. "Maybe. But when I stop moving, I start remembering. And that's a harder thing to wrangle than any steer." Clara's expression softened. "Then maybe you just need new memories." Eli didn't answer, but his heart gave a quiet stir, the kind that makes a man realize he's not as untouchable as he pretends to be. The days stretched into weeks. They fixed the old barn roof together, side by side under the heat, sweat streaking dust across their skin. When evening came, they'd sit by the porch rail, boots kicked up, watching the sunset melt over the horizon. Clara laughed more now, small, sudden bursts that caught Eli off guard every time. It was the kind of laugh that made the air feel lighter. Sometimes, she'd hum an old tune her mother used to sing, and Eli would find himself listening like it was the first music he'd heard in years. But peace never stays long in a land that's seen too much blood. Late one afternoon, Eli rode out to check the north fence. The grass was high, waving gold under the wind, and everything looked as it should, until he spotted the hoofprints. Too deep, too many. Fresh. He dismounted, crouched low, tracing the tracks with a calloused hand. There were 4, maybe 5 riders. The same number as Wade had brought before. His jaw clenched tight. When he rode back to the cabin, the light had already begun to fade. Clara was on the porch, peeling apples with a small knife. She looked up when she saw his face and stilled. "What is it?" He tied his horse to the post, his voice low. "They've been out there. Watchin'. Callan's men." Her hand froze mid-motion. "You sure?" Eli nodded. "Tracks don't lie. They're close enough to see the smoke from our fire." Fear flickered in her eyes, quick as lightning, but she steadied herself. "Then what do we do?" He stepped closer, his tone calm but firm. "We stay alert. I'll ride to the marshal come mornin', tell him what's what. Till then, doors stay locked, lamps out early." Clara nodded, but her hands trembled just slightly. "He won't stop, Eli. You know that." He met her gaze, eyes dark and certain. "Then neither will I." That night, the world went quiet again, too quiet. No wind, no crickets, just the sound of the fire breathing low in the hearth. Clara sat at the table, turning the knife over in her hands. Eli stood near the window, watching the dark stretch beyond the fields. After a long silence, she said softly, "When I first came here, I didn't think I'd ever sleep again. I'd wake to every sound, thinkin' he'd found me. But lately," her voice faltered. "Lately, I feel safe. Like maybe the world ain't all pain and runnin'. Eli turned from the window. "You are safe here, Clara. Long as I'm breathin', that won't change." She looked up at him, eyes glistening in the firelight. "You can't keep watch forever, Eli." He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a rough whisper. "Maybe not. But I'll damn sure try." Their eyes held, long enough that the space between them started to hum with something unspoken. The air was heavy with it, that pull neither could name but both could feel. Eli looked away first, clearing his throat. "You should rest. I'll take the first watch." Clara hesitated, then rose slowly, her hand brushing his arm as she passed. It was a small touch, but it felt like the whole world shifted with it. When she disappeared into her room, Eli exhaled, running a hand down his face. The night outside was still, but he could feel the tension in his bones. He sat by the window till dawn, rifle across his lap, eyes on the horizon. And somewhere out there, beyond the rolling hills and dying stars, Wade Callan was waiting, watching, plotting his next move. But this time, Eli wasn't the only one ready. Clara wasn't the frightened girl by the river anymore. She was stronger now. And together, they were something Wade hadn't planned on, 2 souls who'd already survived the worst the world could throw their way. Night broke heavy and strange. The air was too still, too thick, the kind that hums before a storm or a gunfight. The crickets had gone silent, and even the wind held its breath. Eli woke with a start, heart pounding for no reason he could name. The fire in the hearth had burned low, shadows stretching long and thin across the walls. Something felt wrong, like the world had shifted just an inch out of place. He swung his boots to the floor and reached for his rifle. Then he smelled it, faint, but there. Smoke. Not from the heart. From outside. He was out the door before the thought had finished forming. The night sky glowed orange on the horizon, flickers of flame dancing through the dark. The barn, the old one he and Clara had spent weeks fixing, was burning. "Clara," he shouted, spinning toward the cabin. She appeared at the doorway, eyes wide, hair tumbling loose. "Eli, what's happening?" "Get back inside," he barked. "Stay low, grab what you can." But she was already running toward him, bare feet kicking up dust. No. The horses. Clara. Before he could stop her, she darted toward the blaze. Eli cursed under his breath and followed, pulling his bandana up against the smoke. The barn was half consumed, fire roaring up through the roof beams. The heat was fierce, alive, devouring everything it touched. Inside, the horses screamed and kicked, trapped in their stalls. Clara coughed, eyes watering, but she didn't stop. She grabbed a rope and swung the gate open, voice trembling but steady. Go. Get out, go. The first horse bolted, then another. Eli grabbed her arm and dragged her back just as a beam crashed to the floor where she'd been standing. Sparks flew, lighting the ground like a shower of stars. Are you trying to die out here? He shouted over the roar. I wasn't leaving them, she coughed. Damn stubborn woman, he muttered, hauling her clear of the smoke. They stumbled back toward the yard, both gasping for air. And that's when they saw him, a dark figure on horseback at the edge of the firelight. Wade Callan. He sat tall in the saddle, his face half lit by the flames, eyes cold and burning with fury. Behind him, two riders waited, rifles slung across their backs. Thought you could hide her from me, Turner? Wade called out, his voice echoing across the crackle of fire. Ain't no one keeps what's mine. Eli stepped forward, rifle raised. You had your chance to walk away, Callan. This is your last. Wade laughed, a sound sharp as broken glass. You think you can protect her? You think you're some kind of savior? You don't know what she is. Clara stepped beside Eli, voice shaking but defiant. I'm not yours, Wade. Not then, not now. That only made him angrier. He dismounted, boots crunching over dry grass. You ruined my life, Clara. I gave you everything. My name, my home, my love, and you repaid it with shame. Eli's voice was low and dangerous. You call that love? You broke her spirit, and you're still too blind to see it. Wade sneered. You don't know a damn thing about her. She ain't what you think. Eli's rifle never wavered. I know enough. Wade's hand twitched toward his gun. Then let's end this right now. The world seemed to stop. The flames crackled, the wind sighed, and for one long second, everything hung in balance. Then Wade drew, fast, but not fast enough. Eli's shot rang out like thunder. Wade staggered, clutching his shoulder, dropping his gun into the dirt. His men froze, unsure whether to fight or flee. Pick him up, Eli said coldly. And get off my land before I change my mind. The men hesitated, but one finally stepped forward, hauling Wade up by the arm. Blood darkened his sleeve, but his eyes still burned with hate. This ain't over, he hissed. Eli stepped closer, eyes hard as iron. It is for you. Wade spat into the dirt, then swung onto his horse with a snarl. The men rode off into the night, their silhouettes fading into the dark beyond the fire's reach. Eli watched them go until the only sound left was the crackle of dying flames. Then he turned to Clara. Her face was streaked with soot, eyes wide with shock and light from the fire. It's over, he said softly. She shook her head, voice trembling. You could have killed him. He nodded once. Could've. But then I'd be no better than him. She stepped closer, the firelight flickering across their faces. You saved me again, Eli. He looked at her, at the way her hair glowed like copper in the fire, at the tears cutting through the ash on her cheeks. His voice dropped low. You ain't mine to save, Clara. You did that yourself the moment you stopped running, Dot. For a long moment, neither moved. The flames behind them hissed and snapped, and the world seemed to narrow to just the two of them, battered, smoke-stained, and still standing. Clara's breath caught. What happens now? Eli's answer came slowly, quietly. Now we rebuild. Maybe start something new. She nodded, eyes glistening. Together? He held her gaze for a heartbeat, then another. Yeah, he said finally. Together. The fire died down to embers, and dawn began to edge over the far ridge, soft, gold, and forgiving. The land was scarred, but it would heal. They both would. The world smelled of ash and rain the next morning. The storm clouds had drifted off toward the hills, leaving behind a sky washed clean and pale. Smoke still curled from what was left of the barn, black ribs of timber jutting up like bones. The fire had taken half the feed, the tack, and most of the hay, but the cabin still stood. The horses grazed close, shaken but alive. Eli walked the yard slowly, boots crunching through the wet soot. Every step ached, every breath heavy, but he was thankful for both. He'd seen men lose everything in one night. He'd learned that if the people you cared for were still standing, you hadn't truly lost. Clara was already out there, hair tied back, sleeves rolled to her elbows. She was shoveling ash away from the corral, moving steadily, jaw set with quiet purpose. When she saw him coming, she paused, brushing the soot from her hands. You should be restin', she said. That shoulder's still raw. He gave a faint smile. Can't rest while there's work left to do. She studied him a moment, then handed him the second shovel. Then quit talkin' and help me dig. For a while, that's all there was, the scrape of metal against dirt, the crackle of cooling wood, the slow rhythm of rebuilding. Words weren't needed. Not yet. When the worst of the wreckage was cleared, Eli leaned against the fence, wiping sweat from his brow. The morning sun hit Clara's face just right, soft and golden, painting her like something the fire couldn't touch. He cleared his throat. You ever think about leavin' here? Goin' east, maybe. Startin' fresh somewhere folks don't know your name. Clara looked out over the plains, the horizon stretching endlessly before them. Used to dream of that, she said. But the more I run, the less I know where home is. Maybe I was never lookin' for a place. Maybe I was lookin' for peace. Eli nodded slowly. And you found it here? She turned toward him. I found you. The words hung there, caught between breath and heartbeat. Eli felt something stir deep, not wild, not sudden, but sure as sunrise. He stepped closer, dust still on his boots, soot still on his hands. Clara, he said quietly, I ain't much with words. Never been. But I reckon I've waited a long time for somebody who sees me the way you do. Her eyes softened. And how's that? Like I'm more than the man I lost. She smiled, small, tender. You are. He reached up, brushed a stray lock of hair from her face, fingers trembling just a little. The touch lingered. The space between them disappeared. For a long, quiet moment, they just breathed, smoke, wind, and memory tangled together. No promises, no grand speeches, just two people who'd finally stopped running. A gust of wind stirred the ashes, scattering what was left of the barn across the yard. Clara watched it drift, then said softly, funny how things end. Fire takes what it wants, but it also clears the ground for something new. Eli nodded. Then we'll build something better. She smiled, eyes glistening. Together? He looked out toward the horizon, where the first light of full morning broke clean and bright. Together, he said. They spent the rest of the day gathering what could be saved. Tools, a few bales of hay, and the saddle Eli's brother once used. The land was scarred, but the air felt lighter. Each swing of the hammer, each nail set in new wood, carried a kind of promise neither spoke aloud. By dusk, a small frame of the new barn stood against the orange sky. Clara leaned against the post, exhausted but smiling. Ain't much yet, she said. Eli stood beside her, eyes on the glowing horizon. It's enough to start again. The wind swept through the grass, whispering like the ghosts of every storm that had come before. He reached for her hand, and this time, she didn't pull away. In the fading light, their fingers intertwined, two survivors, two hearts, one quiet beginning. The weeks rolled by, soft as the wind that moved across the plains. The land healed, slow but sure. Green began to edge through the black soil where the fire had run wild, and the smell of smoke gave way to the scent of rain and earth again. Eli and Clara worked side by side through it all, fixing fences, breaking new ground, rebuilding what the flames had taken. Some days were long, others longer, but neither of them complained. They had learned that love wasn't in the easy moments. It was in the sweat, the silence, the grit it took to stay. One evening, the sun was falling low, painting the horizon in gold and crimson. Eli stood at the edge of the field, wiping dirt from his hands, watching the horses graze. Clara came up behind him, carrying 2 tin cups of coffee, her dress brushed with dust. He took one from her, nodding his thanks. They stood there for a while without speaking, just listening to the sounds of the ranch, the creak of the windmill, the soft whinny of the mare, the hum of life returning. Clara finally said, "Feels different now. Like the land's breathing again." Eli nodded. "Yeah. She's tough. Always has been. Just needed a little care." She looked up at him then, eyes catching the last of the light. "Kinda like you." He chuckled, the sound low and rough. "I ain't near as pretty." "Maybe not," she said, smiling, "but you're twice as stubborn." He took a slow sip, letting the warmth settle. Then his voice softened. "You ever think about what's next?" Clara tilted her head. "You mean after the fences, the rebuildin'?" He nodded. She thought for a moment, then looked out over the horizon. "I reckon I'll stay right here. Don't need to run anymore. Don't need to hide." She paused. "Truth is, Eli, I don't think I'd know how to breathe without this place now. Without you." He set his cup down on the fence post, turned toward her fully. The wind tugged at her hair, the sky behind her burning with color. "Clara," he said quietly, "this ranch was just dirt and ghosts before you came. Now it feels like home again." She smiled faintly, tears glinting at the corners of her eyes. "You sure about that, cowboy? Might just be that coffee talkin'. He stepped closer, his voice steady, honest. "No, ma'am. It's you talkin' to my heart." There was a silence then, full and golden, like the earth itself was holding its breath. Eli reached for her hand, and she let him. No hesitation this time, no fear. They stood there as the sun slipped below the edge of the world, shadows stretching long across the fields. In that quiet, something settled between them, not just love, but peace. That night, they sat by the fire outside, the stars sharp and endless overhead. The wind had turned cool, carrying the scent of sage and new grass. Clara leaned her head against Eli's shoulder, her voice soft as a whisper. "Do you ever think about Wade?" she asked. Eli's eyes were fixed on the fire. "Sometimes. But not with hate anymore. Man like that, he was already burnin' long before he lit that fire. Some folks can't see beyond their own pain." Clara nodded slowly. "Guess we've both been there once." "Yeah," he said, "but we found our way out." The flames crackled, throwing sparks up into the night. Eli took her hand again, fingers rough but gentle. "The world doesn't promise us easy roads, Clara. But it gives us the chance to choose who we walk them with. That's enough for me." She smiled, eyes half closed. "Then let's keep walking. The fire burned low, the stars brightened, and the night grew still. Somewhere out there, the coyotes called, their cries fading into the dark hills like a hymn. Morning came slowly, golden and quiet. The land gleamed fresh after the dew. Clara stepped out onto the porch, the hem of her dress brushing the wood, and watched Eli ride out across the fields. The sun lit his figure like a painting, the lone rider who wasn't lonely anymore. He turned once, lifting his hand in a small wave, and she smiled, the kind of smile that could carry a man through a lifetime. Under that vast Texas sky, two hearts that had once been lost had found what mattered most, not escape, not revenge, but a place to belong. And if the land had a voice, it might have whispered something then, about love born from ashes, about the strength to rebuild, about how even the hardest hearts can find their way home when they stop running from what they need most. Eli rode on toward the ridge, the horizon wide open before him, and the story of the ranch, their story, settled into the dust and wind like it had always been meant to be there. Because out here, in this wild country, the truth was simple. Some loves don't burn out in the fire. They rise from it.